Thank you for joining us today to discuss thriving in orbit. We're going to talk about the forces that will shape the trajectory of the space economy and how to capitalise on this shift. The space economy is growing at an unprecedented rate, going from niche to ubiquitous and creating value for multiple sectors. According to a WEF report, the space economy is forecast to be worth $1.8 trillion by 2035, which is just a staggering number. Space activity is not just confined to in-orbit and increasingly plays a role in our daily lives through things like satellites. The integration of space is driven by multiple trends, including decreasing launch costs, commercial innovation, and diversification of investments. Joining me to discuss this, I'm delighted to welcome our panel. We have Hiroshi Yamakawa, who is president of the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency. We have Andrius Kubilius, who is EU Commissioner for Defence and Space. We have Dava, Newman, who is the director of the MIT Media Lab, and Zach, Bogue, who is managing partner and co-founder of deep tech venture capital firm DCVC. Thank you, and welcome to those joining us online. And just a reminder that if you're sharing your thoughts about what you're hearing here, please use the hashtag WEF25. Now let's get started. In the intro, I mentioned the democratization of space. First of all, what kind of commercial opportunities do you see, Zach?
Sure. DCVC, we're an early stage deep tech venture fund. We back entrepreneurs solving hard real world problems with AI, which means that we invest in space, rockets and satellites. We've been investing in that sector since 2013. And venture capital dollars are very small compared to what you were previously thought from space. And there's really three megatrends driving this. You mentioned one of them, decreasing launch costs. Over the course of just my investing career, launch costs has decreased by at least 10x, which is kind of a staggering decrease, as well as we think there's probably another 10x decrease coming over the next decade. That makes it much more approachable. The next trend is the use of off-the-shelf technologies. Previously, the conventional wisdom was that you needed to spend millions of dollars to build a satellite, the cost of like an office building. Now you can approach some of the microsatellites on the cost of a car, tens of thousands of dollars. So these plunging costs have really made this accessible from in a for-profit fund, right? Obviously, space stuff in orbit is very useful, it's very exciting, but for us, there needs to be a real commercial use case back down on the planet. And so these are sort of what we think are the opportunities, and obviously with these decrease, and then the third mega trend is increasing frequency. SpaceX obviously drove down the commercial cost of launch, and then companies like Rocket Lab are making it so that you can launch satellites almost as much as weekly on a sort of a small payload capacity. All of these things make it much more approachable from a commercial perspective, and I'd say it's no longer just the province of governments.
Thank you. And Dava, I'd love to hear about which areas of technology innovation you're most interested in, or what's the most exciting.
Oh, thank you so much. So again, from the Media Lab and our Space Exploration Initiative, most exciting today and in front of my mind is getting back to the moon. Why? Because we have a launch 1 month, February 28th. It's really an interesting launch to talk about. If you don't know, is what we started when I was back at NASA, the public-private partnerships, but really opening this up. It's literally democratizing it. So these are small missions that industry has that'll launch on a SpaceX capsule, but it's barely millions. And we talk about space missions to the moon, you think billions, and huge missions, and you think hundreds of millions, tens of millions. No, we're talking a few. And so here, university folks, researchers, we get to fly payloads to the moon. It's high risk, might fail, but it's my job as the Apollo program person, like get my students' ideas, get our science to the moon. So we'll launch hopefully in a month. The technologies that we're flying are very important, the scientific benefit. We're going to the South Pole. All spaceflight is hard. The moon, and specifically landing on the South Pole, is going to be really tough. But we're going to Shackleton Crater. It's magnificent, 21 kilometers wide. We're going there to look at the ice. We know where there's ice, water, for exploration. And we'll be flying a camera. It's fundamental. It's the first time that humanity will go to another planet. We take LiDAR and colors and RGB. When you're in the vacuum of the moon, you have no depth perception. So that's not good for our human missions coming up. Are you 10 meters or 100 meters away? So we're going to take all those images. So if the mission succeeds, if the garage door comes up and that rover, that commercial rover comes out, we'll be snapping photos, but they'll be very interesting images. Then the students get to do small rovers, and it just shows you just the universities are participating, new small space companies, Intuitive Machines, maybe you've never even heard of it. all these, we're all working together. We're very excited about going well beyond low Earth orbit to the moon and then to Mars. To Mars is takes a lot of advanced technology because we're going there very purposely. Scientific purpose is to look at the evidence of life, probably past life, and prove that. And there's lots more, many more questions. Exoplanets to all of we just launched Europa Clipper, to look at Europa, a wonderful water world in Jupiter. So many, 100 space science missions going on.
Thank you. And Andrius, we see really fast-paced growth from countries like the US and China. What do you see the role for Europe in the space industry and developing technologies?
Well, thanks a lot. I am quite a newcomer into space, issues, despite the fact that I graduated, many years ago, physics, and was, spending 10 years in research. I will try to, say just a few words as I see the whole development and what is coming. Not only where we are. Yes, we see, United States, with great dreams, romantic, moving ahead, exploration, new frontiers, and so on. We are Europeans a little bit, how to say, not so romantic maybe, I don't know why.
Much more romantic.
We are practical people, We are not anymore looking where there are new frontiers, We were, during 20th century, how to say, retracting from some territories. But, when I'm looking into the space, first of all, my impression is very simple. If you look from, into some kind of historical perspective, the 19th century was a century, if you look into a historical perspective from communications, what people were using for communications. So 19th century was, century of railways. 20th century, cars started to appear, automobiles and planes. Now, at the end of 20th century, we started to move into the space. And from that point of view, my point is 21st century will be really the century of space. Space will become new normal. Here will be, romantic people looking to new frontiers. Here will be also practical people like Europeans, making Galileo, making Copernicus, service to all the people. The best service, well, let me, to be proud that Galileo is better than American, production and so on. But of course, we are losing, launching. We shall try to, to catch up. But, it's becoming new normal. I mean, and you can look, well, if you will look into, for example, cars industry, automobiles industry. At some time, Ford was, it looks like that Ford is, everywhere, everything. In some way, we see now also situations that some, companies are becoming global, leading almost monopolies and so on. But it will not stay forever, There will be normal development of industries, normal development of space, communications. People will become accustomed to that. So that's what is coming. I am always, asking very simple question, Now, I have grandson, just 3 months old, the fourth one, And I'm asking, so what my grandson Vincentus, what he will see at the end of the 21st century? What will be, what will happen in space? I cannot predict, but I can say that really, now for us it's, something totally new, but it will become absolutely, new normal life of daily life with all the different sorts of, space economy developing. But, when we're looking into space economy again, I see, at least 4 branches. First of all, space for economy, where we are good with, Galileo and Copernicus. Then, economy of space with launching, satellites and things like that. Then economy in space, which perhaps is coming I am, trying to be also a realistic dreamer that, manufacturing, energy production in space perhaps will start to come, and that will be what I call economy in space. And there is economy, what I call economy of space exploration. The dreams to start mining in moon, for example. I don't know if that's, if that's realistic, but that also can come. So we shall see all those different developments, and we need to be ready for that.
Thank you, and let me bring you in here, Hiroshi. We're seeing quite a lot of commercial joint ventures, perhaps because of some of the funding issues with space projects. What do you think about JVs and partnerships between countries as well? Do you think that that's the way to move forward quickly?
Well, thank you very much. And the answer is yes. But let me start with, describing the national goals of Japan. And then I'm going to talk about funding and finally international collaboration. So talking about the national goals, the first goal is autonomous access to space, or maintaining or strengthening it. And the second is increasing international competitiveness. And third is space sustainability and economy. It's not so romantic, but it's national goals. And to meet those goals, JAXA is engaging in R&D, research and development. And also we are actually developing, launching and operating rockets and satellites. And a new role, which is funding function was added last year to JAXA, Japanese Aerospace Exploration Agency. And the Space Strategy Fund is to foster Japanese space industry and even non-space industry. And the budget for what we call Space Strategy Fund is annually $2.0 billion US dollars. And it's bigger than our own budget. JAXA's budget is annual budget is about 1.5 billion US dollars. And the total Japanese government budget for space is about 6 billion. So the remaining 2.5 will go to, for example, Ministry of Defense, Cabinet Secretariat, who is in charge of information gathering satellites, and the Cabinet Office, in charge of Japanese navigation satellite systems. And But I'd like to talk about something about the Space Strategy Fund, because the Space Strategy Fund is not for JAXA, it's of course for space industry and also academia. And the main target is includes so many things like communication, of optical communication, quantum key distribution communication, and navigation, and also remote sensing, satellite data analysis based on AI and machine learnings, and many others like on-orbit service, space debris mitigation, and everything. And also space science exploration and space transportation system. I'm talking about rockets. So those are the key areas we would like to develop and help or assist the space industry. And the most important point is that based on those established technologies, we have to make it a real business. And in that sense, international cooperation is vital, very essential, because no single country can do everything, and that's why we have to collaborate. But at the same time, it makes every space mission very sustainable, and that's why we have to do international collaboration. And also, not only international space collaboration, but also we have to connect space sector and non-space sectors to produce innovation or produce new markets and to maximize the returns on investments of the government or private venture capitals. So I think that's the way we have to do, and right now we're pursuing that direction.
Mm-hmm. And Zach, sticking with rockets, how long do you think it will take before the players become more diversified in terms of who can actually raise money to be able to launch a rocket?
I think there's already pretty good diversification. Obviously, there's the sort of well-known government players, and as we've heard, there's more governments developing rockets. Obviously, SpaceX and Rocket Lab. I think that's, I don't know how much more redundancy we need, but sort of Another area of sort of rocketry that I'm also really interested in that's sort of coming is lots of the innovation we've spoken about has involved LEO, low Earth orbit. And these are sort of the Planet Labs and the sort of existing satellites that we sort of hear about of sort of the new space economy. There's a cool company called Impulse Space that's sort of enabled by all of these plunging costs that now can commercially take satellites very quickly from LEO to MEO or GEO, and I'll explain those. So MEO is middle Earth orbit. That's often where GPS satellites are for sort of navigation. And then also GEO, which is geostationary orbit, which is where a lot of communication satellites are. Obviously, we're also seeing communication satellites increasingly move back down to LEO. This is sort of Starlink. But this company, Impulse Space, is just basically a little booster that actually sort of rides along as payload, not part of the rocket, that will just take these commercial satellites now from LEO into these higher orbits, which sort of enables a whole new types of modalities for private companies in orbits that were previously dominated really by government, as well as by sort of the big communications players, which is sort of an interesting, related to rockets innovation that we're seeing coming into the market right now.
Mm-hmm. And while we're still on the topic of funding, I'd just like to ask about the sort of post-SPAC turndown and where you think the industry is in terms of finding funding.
Sure. Obviously, the SPAC boom that is still sort of the rabbit still going through the boa constrictor. And obviously, we like seeing deep tech companies making it into the public markets because as a member of the public markets is your lowest cost, your access to the lowest cost of equity capital and lowest cost of debt capital. Obviously, much more transparency. Obviously, the SPAC boom pulled a bunch of space companies onto the public markets a little too soon, and it was actually almost sort of became a defensive measure of these companies getting public too early. But that said, now that we have some great companies that are on the public markets by SPACs, obviously Planet Labs is one, but we're also seeing now SPACs actually coming into the public market and succeeding. So I think we're also just seeing a thawing of the IPO market as well. So I think that there will be increasing number of companies that are able to make it public, which is terrific for sort of the commercialization of space.
Thanks. And Dava, I'm going to ask you the Trump question. Do you think Trump is a romantic or a pragmatist? What impact do you think he's going to have on the space industry and some of the either financing or innovations? Do you think it's going to make any difference having Trump as president?
Well, moving in to a new administration in the U.S., again, the public-private partnerships, this is consistency of purpose is how NASA and even space with allowing how it works in the U.S. and globally. It's not just the U.S. I think it's globally. So when it comes to scientific missions and technology and more government seed funds to large funding, I hope that there will be some consistency of purpose. It's going to be chaotic for sure. New opportunities to push forward, to accelerate. Some of the investments, especially with the new, not approved, but NASA Select. I think we'll be very focused on acceleration and hopefully still public-private partnerships. So hopefully there's still partnerships, but there's going to be focus on acceleration for commercial. That's great, but thousands and thousands of space companies probably aren't going to succeed. So it's what we've heard here, I think, from the panel, the diversification, and maybe there's some niche markets. So the innovation, hopefully it's spurred by innovation. So I'm very optimistic on the innovation piece and the innovation play. That's good. That's good for all of us in terms of partnerships and alliances and consistency of purpose. Shared values. I'm more concerned on those areas.
Do you think? Oh, sorry.
Just to build on that, I mean, I feel like from the very commercial perspective, all of these companies sort of need to be able to operate with whomever's in the White House. And so, obviously, sort of the commercial companies, they will, I think, just kind of continue forward without much change because they're not sort of entirely reliant on partnership. So I think it's going to be chaotic, but I think that from just the purely for-profit space companies, that they will sort of largely just continue forward.
Yeah. So just to end that again, think anything with space is you do think decades. It's fantastic now that we get opportunities, and within months we can design and develop CubeSats, and our students can elementary schools CubeSats and launch it within a year. That's the democratization. Space is democratized. It's for all. Everyone has access. It was mentioned by the commissioner. So space is not so special anymore, low Earth orbit. It's just available to everyone. So it's just not the next frontier for discovery and romance. It's actually for business, economy, and hopefully for the benefit of Earth and all of us on Earth. So that's, again, where we see low Earth orbit. Now it's much more discovery, and do the business cases close for the Moon and Mars. I haven't seen them close myself. So that's more what I put in discovery. And back to your question, I think that'll be consistent. We go through administrations, but when you have to take a 10-year, you have to decade look. You have to take the decade-long look, and then we take the immediate, where's the business model? How do you accelerate that? Mm-hmm. So I see it. Hopefully we'll get it in balance and just keep pushing forward. And when you're mission-driven, as NASA and agency, when you're mission-driven, that's great because that's great focus. Yeah. So hopefully some of the other chaos and things like just be mission-focused and get the job done.
Thank you. And Andrius, if we could talk a little bit about defence, and how important do you think it is to be a strong player in the space industry for defence, from threats from Russia, China, those kinds of things?
Well, very good question. Definitely space services, are becoming crucial in defence. We see that from, Russian war against Ukraine very clearly. And definitely, I see here, CEO of European Space Agency, Joseph Eschenbach, he knows much better what they are planning to do, what kind of, new installations and new services are going to be established, using established services like established installations like Galileo and Copernicus. Really, we are looking how to expand possibilities, to have more services for security. And now we launched, Iris Square for secure satellite communication. Again, new development, and I hope that again it will be at the same highest level of quality, technologies with quantum and so on. So that's where we're going. So this is what I call space for defense. On another side, we need to be really very dynamic in developing what I call defense for space. Needed technologies. That's becoming crucial because it's very clear that because of this significance of space services for security and defense, of course, there are threats that they will be, by our adversaries will be attacked in whatever way, physically, like we have seen, something of that happening, hacking and so on and so on. So we are looking also how to develop that side of the story, and among so-called defense projects of common European interest, which we are now developing, and perhaps we shall come with so-called white paper on European defense, with a whole list of those, big projects which can be realized only by all together, by EU member states, not alone. One of those projects, besides air defense shield, for example, we're also looking into space shield as a project, how to defend our installation. So that's what is next, I don't know if that sounds not very romantic, perhaps, but that's what we need to do.
Hiroshi, do you have anything to add on the defense side of
Well, yes.
things?
First, I noticed today's keyword is romantic. Well, talking about defense or national security, JAXA is doing both. I mean, civil space and national security space. And so we are very closely collaborating with the Japanese Ministry of Defense and other national security-related organizations. And for example, we are engaging in space situational awareness. That is, we are doing observing space debris and of course active satellites, And the aim is to prevent collisions between our satellites or protect our satellites. And 2 years ago, Japanese Ministry of Defense also established their own SSA sensors on the ground. And so we have a direct interface with Japanese MOD and also US DOD from about 10 years ago. And the other point is that we are also having contract with MOD for space situational awareness, but what we call the next step is SDA, Space Domain Awareness Satellite, which will be designed and manufactured and operated by MOD, but we also having contract with MOD to contribute to that system. So we are doing many things together with not only MOD, but other security-related agencies or organizations like Japan Coast Guard. Mm-hmm. And so we are providing satellite data for maritime domain awareness. So that kind of activity is going on between us.
Thanks. And I'd like to bring things back to Earth for a few moments and just talking about the opportunities for leveraging space technology to address sustainability challenges. So according to a WEF report, Earth observation capabilities can help to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by up to 2 gigatons annually in the next 5 years. What kinds of other applications could there be for helping to monitor things like greenhouse gas emissions, methane, that sort of thing? Dava, I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that.
Yeah, thank you very much. So again, people might not realize now more than 50%, we hit a tipping point, more than 50% of all of our Earth data, our climate data is from space. So we can't live a day without space. You can't live a day without this. As the information is eyes on Earth. So our constellations of Earth observing satellites are phenomenal in that they are, as you mentioned, really have an economic value as well. But I call them the vital signs. So monitoring and measuring and mapping, you mentioned greenhouse gases, but CO2, methane in particular, that's, industry really cares about that. The public cares too, but now it's high precision methane mapping, so that if you see methane, of course we know its consequences to greenhouse gas and to climate. So you want to stop those leaks if it's a pipeline right away. That's really very valuable. And pollution, I want to talk about human health. So we just launched a new satellite mapping. So we have daily coverage of the Earth, and now in pollution. There's, you take a look, so my example is over New York City. So now you look at the pollution on a daily basis of New York, and you give that data, it's open data, because it's government data, private folks, so you give that to the hands of people, because it's not just New York is polluted, right? It's boroughs, it's specific areas, critically important for human health. Where are the hospitals? Where are people getting sick? What's unhealthy? So really now close to real-time measuring, mapping, and monitoring, where space connects with health and wellness, we hope. Just one example, but it's a great example of the empowerment of that data, that very useful data coming down from space. Put that into people's hands and the decision makers, and people, disasters, of course, natural disasters are the other very important use case and scenario. How do we get data as soon as possible in real time to people on the front lines, whether it's fire or floods? How do you get to decision makers? How do you get people out of harm's way? Because at the end of the day, then that's saving lives.
Yeah, very important. Hiroshi and...
Sorry. Go ahead.
Thank you. Well, talking about climate change, I'm very proud to say that the JAXA has launched the world's first satellite dedicated to observing carbon dioxide in 2009, and the name of the satellite is GOSAT, and we are currently operating 2 GOSAT satellites. So we already have accumulated about 15 or 16 years of carbon dioxide data, variation seasonally and also globally. And last year, we also very proud that together with the European Space Agency, we have launched EarthCare satellite dedicated to tackling climate change. And I think the EarthCare has already produced so many valuable data to contribute to climate change issues. And so there's a lot to do. There's a lot we have to do together, internationally, and not only with the United States, not only with the European, but European Space Agency, but I mean, we have to collect every data, I mean, related to climate change.
Zachary.
Yeah, and just sort of building on both these great comments, over half the variables we need to track to address climate change can only be tracked from space, and double-clicking on methane. So methane is responsible for 1/3 of current climate change. It's a huge number because it's a very potent greenhouse gas. As it turns out, much of that either comes from agriculture or from installed oil and gas infrastructure. For installed oil and gas infrastructure, it's actually easiest to pinpoint the leaks from airplanes, which is interesting. So that just, it's very densely installed infrastructure, so you really need to be able to pinpoint it that will actually enable a truck to go fix it. But from orbit, there's things that you can only really do from orbit. For instance, you can't really just go into Saudi Arabia or Kazakhstan and rent a Cessna and go fly over the oil fields. So spotting the super emitters sort of globally and really actually being able to address those mega leaks is one. And the other is actually there's satellites that look at sort of the net output per large unit of area. Because right now we're doing sort of a bottoms-up analysis on methane, and we're missing a lot of it because it's, there's the owners of the oil and gas infrastructure aren't necessarily reporting their best estimates, and so understanding actually, hey, from this unit area, there's this much methane coming out, and where is it actually all coming from? Because currently the numbers aren't adding up. So these are two great use cases from orbit.
Interesting. And Andrius, you have something to add?
Yeah, just one small comment, small info. If you remember at the beginning of this year, of January, just 2 weeks ago, here was publication of Global Climate Highlights Report 2024. And I put my comment on Twitter, which starts with very clear statement. EU Earth Observation Satellite System, Copernicus, warns you, 2024 was the warmest year on record and the first to exceed 1.5 Celsius degrees above the pre-industrial level. So that's where Copernicus system really is able to provide sometimes not very nice, conclusions.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And before we open up to some questions from the floor, I would just like to touch on the topic of space tourism and whether, you think it's a good idea, whether it's, something that we should be spending money on rather than, before we get enough satellites up into space. Would you want to go as a space tourist? Maybe we can start with you, Andrius.
Oh. Good, tomorrow. No, we shall talk with Commissioner on transport and tourism. Should we join our efforts to move ahead? Yeah.
Okay, Zach, what do you think?
Sure. So my friend actually went into space on one of these commercial tourism endeavors, and he actually went with William Shatner on the same mission. And he basically said as soon as he got back down to the planet, he just wanted to get back up there because the human eye can see in so many degrees of color that the photos just don't capture. The blackness of space, he said, was just staggering. You just can't actually understand how black it is compared to the blueness of the planet. He said it really was sort of a transformational endeavor. So I'm net positive on that as long as it's not pulling away from basic R&D and all of the stuff. But why not? And sure, yes, I would like to go to space.
Dava, what about you?
Oh yeah, I mean,
yeah,
yeah, I'm all in. Not just space, like train astronauts. I mean, we have someone who's been in space here in the audience with us to talk about. So. But for me, again, it'd be a little bit more scientifically driven. So Mars, I mean, I'd prefer to go to Mars. It'd be okay. I've flown a lot in microgravity. We test in all of our experiments. We fly microgravity problems. We experience weightlessness, true microgravity, lunar gravity, 1/6G, Mars, 3/8G. So, I'm fascinated with performance of humans and the physics of it, and again, finding life, the scientific questions. But yeah, we're all in, and I think we'll see many, many people in low Earth orbit. I think the tourism in low Earth orbit, as your friend, as private missions are here. So yeah, that's going to scale. It's going to be fun. You can all tell me about the business case, but I think we're just right on the cusp. many people to the planets and other things. I think that's a whole different question. I don't see that in near time. But I'll just end on the overview effect. It's real. It's not just the colors of license. When you're in microgravity and you look down on spaceship Earth, the pale blue dot, when you look down and you see our thin atmosphere, if I take a soccer ball, who wants to go to Europe, if Earth to scale is the size of a soccer ball, our life support system, our beautiful life support system, our atmosphere, it's 3 human hairs thick. So I can tell you that, and maybe it resonates or not. We have to keep this and protect this. But when you see that and you see Earth and just how magnificent it is, some astronauts turn away. They cry. It's so beautiful. And everyone then realizes very emotionally that this is humanity. We're all in this together. It's spaceship Earth, and we're all astronauts down here living together. So what I love about it is that transformative, philosophical change. I think that's how we change human behavior. It's all related to me, to climate and health.
That's wonderfully expressed. Thank you. Andrius, I knew you wanted
Just
to
a
say
short
something
comment,
quick.
romantic,
Yeah, I'm a romantic. It's my role on this panel, I've decided.
I'm dreaming. Maybe my grandson, on the weekend, will have to make a choice, being, a little bit older, of course, before the end of the century, where to go, 100 kilometers to the nearest beach or 100 kilometers up to the space, for the weekend.
Exactly, 400 kilometers.
Okay.
Thank you. And we'll take some questions from the room. Perhaps we could, the European Space Agency, I know you're here, if you'd like to say something, and then behind the second row as well, please. Thank you.
No, thank you. So much has been said. There's not much more to add because a lot of points have been raised. But there is one point I think which is sometimes not or underestimated or under noticed. Space is so important for daily life. Of course, we all love seeing rockets going up and seeing big things happening, which make a lot of noise, and this is all very exciting. But sometimes we don't realize how much space has been integrated in daily life already today. You mentioned Copernicus, you mentioned navigation, also in many other domains where it is literally part of daily life. Or in other words, you couldn't function well if you wouldn't have your space infrastructure in place. There's one point, and this is a bit also which I'd like to address to Andrius Kubilius as new commissioner. Of course, when we portray ourselves into the future, not 3 years or 4 years in terms of a political mandate, but 10 years, 20 years, really see what needs to be done now in order to make a difference in the future. And you have mentioned your title is Defense and Space, and defense will certainly be more and more important. How do you see, and this is probably a bit specific to Europe, because in Europe the defense portion is underutilized compared to other countries. How do you see the longer-term evolution linking defense and space? You are preparing a paper now within the first 100 days on a defense strategy. How much do you see space being part of it, and how is what is your vision there longer term? Of course, now things need to be done in order to be then in place in a couple of years.
Well, very briefly, you're absolutely right. We need to see where space is what is the direction. Definitely, the question is how we can use space services for our protection, for our defense, for our security. That's crucial. We understand from the war technologies how they are moving and how much they are using space data. So that's obvious. For me, it's when I'm looking into the space, it's very clear that we shall have, again, this dual use, developments, very, very important, We need to understand what will happen in general in space, where it will move, what kind of, new areas, new directions will become, a new normal. I'm saying when we are discussing, defense very much, all those, challenges, threats that Russia can test us and so on. And we know where we are with our capabilities. I started to use some kind of this words that we need to have big bang approach. We need to jump up, very quickly, not waiting, not losing time. Then I moved to space. I said, look, I want to see also some kind of this, what is Big Bang for space? What is next? Where we are going? A little bit romantic, but very practical. So because that's very important for us to see, to understand, and then to start to build this perspective, this Big Bang perspective now. Both with established industries, with new space industry, which is very dynamic, very vibrant. So that's how I see the whole picture and the whole situation. And of course, space for defense will be very important, but at the same time, defense of space also will come as one of the very important strategic challenges which we shall need to find a way how to resolve.
Thank you.
Kimberly Washington, CEO of Deep Space Biology and founder of Space for Girls. So the International Space Station has served as a laboratory for advancing innovation research for 25 years, especially in the healthcare sector. Now, with the International Space Station being decommissioned in 2030, and there is an emergence of a lot of choices and options. Government funding for health innovation and research, what happens now? And what happens to the collective, collective research across cross-sectoral governments? And one other question, we're talking about sending humans to space. Our newly appointed president, Elon Musk, just joking, is aiming for Mars, and we have a responsibility to protect human lives and human health. Working with the research that's taking place in space and understanding what happens to our body in space, it's a deep concern. And so I'd like to hear, and I know, Dava, you and your lab, and you're doing a lot to, research health, and so would love to hear feedback. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Well, I think, Hiroshi, please.
Yes. Well, talking about health research, of course, data taken by astronauts are accumulated in every occasion on utilizing an International Space Station. Of course, NASA, ESA, JAXA, every country is accumulating that kind of data. That will not be changed, I think. And the other part of the research related to health, JAXA is engaging in what we call protein crystal growth experiment. And because under very low gravity, the protein crystal is growing very, beautifully, so that we can analyze the structure of the protein when we get back the samples from ISS onto the ground. And that is utilized. We are assuming that those results will be utilized for designing medicine, because when we know the structure very well, then we can design the protein which can be combined with the other part of the protein. So that's one of the examples of the research. And then, so I think that kind of research will continue even after 2030, because it will definitely accelerate the medicine design process. So that's one of the examples.
Dava, anything to add?
Yeah, I can mention that. So, because people just might not know, so on International Space Station on our 6-month missions now with a mixed crew, with all the partners and really all the world going up. Each astronaut performs about 250 science missions, life science missions, and physical science missions, and material science missions in 6 months. So it's a plethora of science. It's really fantastic. It's the world's greatest laboratory, if you ask me, off planet. And so back to health, or the life sciences in terms of crystal growth, beautiful, magical crystals. That's, there's the $1 billion future drug coming out. That's what we're hoping. Material science. Again, breakthrough materials that can only be done in this weightless environment. I think Space Station helped negotiate the last time around with all the partners here to extend life, but it is getting to the end of its life cycle and system. So I think that it does need to be decommissioned. So then how you do that with some private space stations, governments are going to participate, and I think government funding for the fundamental health and life sciences, because those are all, you mentioned the dual use, those are all, the primary use is Earth. That is, science and R&D in space, low Earth orbit, but all for Earth, all Earth-based for disease, drug development, all those kind of things. So it's very much, primary use of space stations, and then it's just a matter of what's the partnership, how much government resources, how much private, how much commercial, and don't forget about a scientist, because we want to, we need to go up there and do the work. So again, I don't see huge changes, but just intentional, and maybe more opportunities too. If the business case closes with the private stations and with governments also, then maybe just doing R&D, but not owning and operating, it's a more efficient, that could be potentially a more efficient model.
And is the health space a sort of commercial interest? Can you see that?
We've seen some ideas in that space. We haven't taken a deep dive. But yeah, it's obviously, there's a lot of research that can only be done in space, so it's an exciting and burgeoning field.
And think I'll just add to that, just in space, but if we think about the spectrum of gravity, I mean, that's where my mind goes. It's not just the microgravity. You can have, it's pretty exciting, artificial gravity. So you can take a look, here, we're at 1G, we've evolved and developed at 1 gravity level. Microgravity is, here. And so think about that whole spectrum from 0 to 1 or higher gravity. That's really fascinating to think about physiology, health benefits, and things like that. So that's really the space, at least for scientific discovery, I'd say, is gravity dependent and opportunities when you change look at across the spectrum of gravity.
Thank you, and I'm afraid we're out of time, but I'd like to thank the panelists for their insightful discussion. So thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.